Welcome to the Ohio Lodge of Research podcast, OLR Connection. I'm Brother David Darty, and in this episode, I sit down with Brother Dan Hrinko, and we discuss what it means to educate a Mason, both as a candidate and as a Mason.
How do you teach or ensure that there's going to be a genuine involvement?
Well, it's a two-part thing. We teach them about the way we view Freemasonry as a philosophy, and that every man who is engaged in a Masonic lodge has a duty to the lodge to contribute to and improve the lodge by contributing whatever talents they have. Okay? But that the lodge has a duty to the man to teach him about the philosophical side of Freemasonry. And that creates an interactive process. Okay. And if the man's not willing to contribute, then he's got no room in our lodge. On the contrary, if the lodge is not fulfilling its duty to teach, then your lodge is failing you. Now, when I give talks about what Freemasonry is, can be, and should be, I never talk about any other lodge other than the ones in which I'm personally involved. And I will stand up there all day and say, Clark Lodge failed me. They never taught me squat. Okay. They taught me how to read the ritual. They taught me how to deliver the ritual, but they did nothing to teach me about what the ritual meant. Okay. It was like learning one of Charles de Gaulle's famous speeches phonetically, delivering it perfectly, and having no clue what you just said. Okay. I will bash my home lodge. Now, is that anything like your lodge? You can figure that on your own. Okay. I suspect that most lodges are a lot like what I grew up in Clark Lodge, but I'm not going to say so, you know. So that's how, we get people to engage by teaching them about this is part of our culture. This is what we expect if you join. Now, you have to realize we have many meetings before we even talk petition. Okay. And in those conversations, we make it very clear. This is who we are. This is what we value. And this is how we function. And if you're not willing to look and engage in that kind of a process, we'll help you find a different lodge.
So when you sit down with a newly initiated entered apprentice, what are, other than the catechism, the obvious things we've always been doing, what are the 4 or 5 points or 4 or 5 ideas that you think are absolutely critical that he learn?
First, that he has a chance to reflect on his experiences. What just happened? I got questions. That's your first meeting. Should be within a week. Okay. Well, it's fresh in his head. Because then you're teaching him it's okay to have questions. It's okay not to know. It's okay to ask. And it's okay to listen to wise advice. Okay. You need to then just walk through the whole degree, ritual and lecture and charge, and talk about what's in there. Now, for me, that usually takes 4 sessions of an hour to an hour and a half each, just to go through that and discuss it. And I'm talking about things like, okay, what's this word hail mean? Well, let's pull off Mackey's and look it up, Let's teach this guy that it's okay to seek out references and all that. I give them the basic education course from the Grand Lodge of Ohio. We read and discuss that. I give them the principles proficiency, not because I want them to do it, but because I want them to have that information, read and discuss. If that's what they elect to do, that's fine. I encourage people to try to do the traditional full from memory because it means that you're going over and over and over and you're digging deeper as you go. But if they're not capable of doing it, that's fine too. So principles proficiency, basic education course. I also give them Carl Claudy's Introduction to Freemasonry. Yeah, more reading, more discussion. Okay. So everybody that I'm involved with gets all those documents, PDF form, and we meet and we talk about it. Now, some guys like, I'm not interested in this. I just want to go to the shrine. Fine. You've got the documents, ignore them at your own peril, you know?
Yeah,
You
I
know?
get it. That makes sense.
So once you've been through all that, I mean, that usually takes a good 4 to 6 weeks, plus you're working on the catechism and all that. So being an enter apprentice for 3, 4 months is not unusual. Now, there's a lot of stuff we do at Arts and Sciences Lodge above and beyond that, but that to me is that is the bare minimum of what a man should be taught about what is going on in the enter apprentice degree to be proficient, you know? He's
Yep.
had a chance to review and discuss and ask questions and look at ways of things of being applicable to daily life. Okay. How do the compasses circumscribe our desires and keep our passions within due bounds with all mankind? What's that got to do with putting up with the idiot at the desk next to you at the office? Okay. And the answer is, everything. But how do you make that transition? Men need to be taught. Oh, by the way, this also applies over here.
There are a lot of men who are Masons who want to be better educated, who want to be more involved, and probably have gone through those basic steps you just described, either with someone or on their own, and don't have any idea where to go next. So for the more experienced Mason, what would be your thoughts?
Well, my own journey has always been, I got questions. Now, I guess I'm cursed with curiosity, okay? But when I have a question, I start digging for answers, and that leads me to reading, to conversations, etc. Okay. And as I go exploring my own questions to find the answers, that is where I find a lot of growth and depth of understanding in Freemasonry. The system, meaning the Lodge of Research, Grand Lodge Ed Committee, and your lodges should be there to facilitate that process. Okay. I mean, is that the job of a lodge? I say it is, because it says in the EA opening, we come to learn and improve ourselves in Masonry, which means that if you go to a meeting where you don't learn nothing or had a chance to improve yourself in Masonry, then your lodge has failed you. It's not lived up to its duty. The purpose of a lodge is not to pay the electric bill. The purpose of a lodge is to, charter says, make Masons. Paying the electric bill just means you have a warm, comfortable place to do it. So to me, the lodge is the men. It's the relationship. It's the activities. That's the lodge. The building is just a place.
Yeah.
Much as I love beautiful art and all that. Okay. So your lodge should be supporting you exploring the questions. But if your lodge isn't doing its job, and sadly most lodges aren't, that's why I like Royal Schofield Society, the way it's structured, because it gives you a guided path to begin to move forward on your own exploration. It puts you in contact with men outside of your immediate circle of lodge brothers who have similar values and attitudes. Okay? And the Lodge of Research can be a place for resources, for discussions, for relationships and connections where your own exploration can be facilitated in the form of, I have a question, can you help me answer it? Also in the form of, hey, have you ever thought about this? My hope in our conversation is you'll ask me a question that'll get me thinking about something different than I ever thought about it before. My hope is that I will make a comment that will strike you as, that's interesting. I need to dig into that a little more. Okay, that is where Masonic education truly happens. And the organizations, the system is there to facilitate that process, not dictate it, but to create the place where that can happen.
And I personally get a lot of enjoyment out of digging and trying to find those answers. But you and I are perhaps different than a lot of Masons in that, as my father always told me, I wasn't smart enough to get out of school. So I just kept amassing degrees and letters after my name. And but most Masons are not, don't fill those shoes, so to speak.
Mhm.
And so I think we're running into more and more Masons who are interested in this idea of going beyond what the Blue Book says and what the lodge necessarily teaches, but don't feel that they have a background or a for lack of a better word, a fundamental knowledge to allow them to ask those questions. How would you encourage them, change their minds, or suggest that they move forward?
This is where a program that we started a while back, the Masonic Roadshow, came from. Some of us have had the privilege of going somewhere far to attend some sort of Masonic symposium. Masonic Restoration Foundation, Midwest Conference on Masonic Education, and we meet people and we are fired up and energized. How do we bring that experience down to the local level? So we started the whole concept of the Masonic Roadshow so that every 4 times a year, some locality around Ohio, you would have some local talent come in and do some presentations on what they've learned in Freemasonry and how they went about doing it, that anybody could come in, engage with, and say, wow, there are possibilities here, but there's an opportunity to teach. Yeah, I'm sitting around the dining hall afterwards having coffee, just being social, but that's an opportunity to teach, and to get them in the mindset of you always have the opportunity to teach.
Yep, no, I get it. Yeah, and that kind of loops back to one of the thing you mentioned earlier that I was gonna say, I was gonna think about was you were talking about how things changed in the 50s and the 60s and how it was just busting through ritual because that's all they had time to do. And I've often asked the question, and I'm sure I'm not the first or the last to ask it, is I'm more curious of what was going on in the teens, in the 20s, when that that increase in membership started to happen. And I'm curious to me, why so many men were interested in becoming Masons prior to 1950. And part of what I think it is, I have no just personal thought, no research to back it up, is what you were just talking about, is opportunities to educate. I think it was a time when there were men who were hungry for knowledge. They didn't have a lot of resources to get that knowledge, and Masonry was an opportunity to acquire it.
Yeah. Well, Carl Claudy did a lot of his writings in the 20s, 30s, and 40s and 50s. Okay. So if you read a lot of stuff that he wrote, my favorites, Old Tyler's Talks, I love that book. Collection of short stories and essays where you get really good nuggets. It's the old Tyler and the new master or the new Mason, and the new Mason's asking questions, and the old Tyler is offering advice that shows insight into the meaning of Masonry. I love it, so he was providing that, early on back in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, part of me wants to dig into some of the old Masonic magazines that Albert Mackey was writing back in the 1870s, 80s, and 90s. That would have a lot of insight into what all was going on. I have my own sociological theory, and it kind of goes as follows. Freemasonry, if you boil it down, is the understanding of the value of a trusting relationship. Okay? That if we strip away education degrees and economics and social status, it's who you are as a person that we learn to discover and value. Okay? The value of a trusting relationship is most important when times are tough. Okay? So if I've lived through a tough time, Civil War Reconstruction, World War I, Great Depression, World War II, I've been in situations where trusting relationships mattered. I now know the value of it, and I'm looking for that. Why do you think so many of our new guys are disproportionately military and police veterans? Because those are jobs where the value of the trusting relationship is highlighted. Okay? So I think when you have a cultural experience where the value of a trusting relationship is thrust upon you, and you appreciate that now that you're aware of it, off you go. You look at the time when I grew up, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Where have we had hard times that forced people to confront the value of a trusting relationship? We haven't. Okay. So I see parallels there. Okay. So why do we have all these young guys looking at Freemasonry now? I mean, we're getting inquiries from mid-20s to mid-40s left and right. Okay. What are they looking for? Okay. Well, the answer is they're looking for something that's meaningful because they're living a life that is relatively superficial. You know, get down to BW3s, have some beers, watch a football game. Yeah, but that only goes so far. There are men who are looking for something of meaning and of value, and they're having a hard time finding it in a culture that is consumer and entertainment driven. And they read on the internet, now that's here to spread it all, and they get promises. Hey, Freemasonry offers 1 through 10. So they show up at the door of a lodge. And here's the important inflection point. If they're looking for a steak dinner and all that lodge gives them is a hamburger, what's going to happen? They're going to join, they're going to come for a while and say this is an empty use of time and disappear. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
This is where lodges are failing to do their job. So if there's one magic wand moment, I would have all lodges understand and implement a way of truly teaching Freemasonry in lodge so that these men who are looking for something of substance and value, which is promised by Freemasonry, get it. And my experience tells me that when they do, they're all in.
If they believe their life is superficial, they're looking for something more, and all we give them is something that is superficial, why do they want more of the same?
All around the country, we're seeing new lodges form around this very desire. Freemasonry promises an in-depth experience. Let's form a lodge or transform a lodge to give that. I'm going to be going out to Portland, Oregon. There's a new lodge out there. It's about 5 years old called Lodge Esoterica. They're flying me out to be a quarterly speaker on, I think it's June 15th, to talk about the craft-driven lodge. I was just at the Grand Lodge of Alaska a year ago, talking at their invitation about this very issue. From that talk, the Grand Master of Oregon came up to me, handed me his card and says, I want you at our Grand Lodge. So last June, I was at the Grand Lodge of Oregon talking about, I tell a story about Joe, you know. Joe is 36 years old. He's got a good job, wife, 2 kids, you know, he's settled, you know, but he wants more. Where does he go? What does he find? What's he looking for? What happens if he finds a typical lodge? What happens if he finds a lodge who is taking their job seriously? And I lay out that whole story, the 2 hypotheticals. And then I say, there are lodges out there that take this seriously, and they are thriving, while other lodges are dying. Okay?
The purple of the fraternity. And I'm going to say this with all due respect. I think the one flaw with that particular book of yours is the title, The Purple of the Fraternity. And I understand completely why it was done, But I think unfortunately it kind of gives some people the idea that it's specifically for district deputies and so forth. And as I know you've pointed out, is that every leader, regardless of where they are positioned, can benefit from the information in there.
I think you're right. I mean, it's a very apt title considering what it was written for, but the general applicability goes beyond that. And so whenever I'm sitting there and someone walks up at a table and say, "What's this about?" I immediately say, "It's about this and more."
Yeah.
And, you know, because they say, "Well, I'm not a deputy. What do I need this for?" And I explain to them why this could help them. The Purple of Fraternity was an interesting book. I was in My publisher is McCoy Masonic Publishing and Supply. Started in the 1850s by publishing books and rituals and guides, and they are the granddaddy of all Masonic publishers. And I'm pleased that Steve McCall signed me on as an author. Okay. He takes care of all the expenses and overhead of printing and publishing and distribution. I just write stuff and go talk. But anyway, I was in a meeting with him and he said, "What's next?" And I says, "I'm not sure." And he says, "Let me tell you what the market needs." He says, "Every year we've got all these men being made district deputies who haven't got a clue how to be a leader. We need something on that." So I says, "Well, let me noodle on it for a while." And he gave me an idea. And again, reflecting on what I know as a professional, my experiences of seeing district deputies come and go as a member of lodge and all that, I began to notice some patterns. And so I decided that there is all sorts of corporate leadership models, the Maxwell method and so on and so forth, okay? But they all come from the corporate world where you've got a wide variety of tools available to leverage people's actions, incentives, as well as threats. Okay. Do it or you don't get vacation or you don't get promoted or, you know, that kind of stuff. We don't have any of those tools in Freemasonry. So if you come in with a corporate attitude, you're not going to be very successful because you're trying to do things you can't do. And you're going to be unsuccessful because you're missing out on most important things. Doug Kaler, wonderful guy, turned me on to the servant leadership model. So I began doing some reading on that. I'm going like, dang, this sounds like Masonic lessons. So I decided to draw parallels between servant leadership and Masonic teachings, which is very nice and theoretical and real heady and full of complex terms and all that. And like you said, Joe Average sometimes has a hard time getting through that. So I broke it down into 3 archetypes that very clear, very understandable, very easy to identify with. Number 1, I called the cop. Everybody knows what a cop is. Everybody knows what a cop is supposed to do, okay? And what we tend to find is the person in Masonic leadership terms who's acting like a cop comes in with a list of rules, and it's his job to enforce those rules. That's his job. He's the enforcer. He tends to get a little heavy-handed, a little dictatorial, and all that. We've all seen it happen, okay? Now, why is that a bad thing? Well, it breeds resentment. You get compliance as long as they're in the room, and then when they leave, they all thumb their nose at you. Okay. And sometimes you're missing the whole point. You know, you can't bully a lodge into doing anything. Okay. So that's one archetype that I talk about, and I point out why that's bad. But we've all seen them. Okay. The other archetype that's also bad is kind of the opposite. You know, the good old boy, the good buddy. Okay. He's the one that likes the title, he likes the adulation, he likes the introductions, but by God, he's not going to point out anything to irritate anybody or deal with a mistake because then they won't like him. Okay? Now, why is that a problem? Well, it means that real problems don't get addressed. Okay? So that means whatever is bad continues on. And in fact, it's even worse because if you're doing it wrong and the district deputy doesn't say anything, well, then it must be right. and you feel like you got his blessing to continue doing these stupid things. Okay? So it becomes not only non-productive, it becomes counterproductive. Okay? So what's the difference in between? Well, most guys into sports, participants watching whatever, they know what a good coach does. A good coach assesses his talents, teaches skills, organizes, guides, but lets the players play. And only as a last resort does he pull rank. Okay? So that's an archetype that I think Joe Average can wrap his head around. So as a district deputy, it's your job to go in, see what's going on, learn what you can, advise and teach, be an example, help them be more successful and all that, and only as a last result, pull rank. In the 3 years that I was a deputy, I only pulled rank twice in 3 years. I'm pretty proud of that, you know? So that's the way that book got structured. It was a specific request to fill a niche in the market, an idea given to me that I was able to then run with my professional training, my personal experience. And everybody's got a gift. And one of the gifts I've been told I have is to take really complex, abstract things and boil it down into simple understanding terminology. I mean, think about it.